John? John, can you hear me? Uh-oh. Dan, do you know what's going on?
Nope. I don't know if he has his sound on.
Oh, maybe he looks like he could be reading something. Maybe he's, yeah. All right, it is 4 o'clock, and I am calling the Policy and Personnel meeting to order. Michelle, may I have roll call, please?
I do not see Michelle,
Michelle?
I do not see Michelle on there. I will text her.
I'm sorry, Dan, Superintendent Keyser, I couldn't understand that.
Sorry, I do not see Michelle on our list of attendees, so I will reach out to her.
Thank you.
There's Michelle.
I'm here, sorry.
Oh, hi, Michelle. Michelle, hi. May I have roll call, please?
Sure. Jacobs?
Here.
Levy? Here. Wong? Is Wong with us?
He is. I don't think he hears.
Wong? Dr. Keyser, is he there with you or is he virtual?
He's virtual.
Okay.
That was odd. I just got kicked off.
Okay. I'll try texting him and see if I can get him to respond as present that way.
Thank you.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, good.
Yep, so I have 2 of you present by voice virtually, and I will verify that Wong is present as well.
Okay, so should I just continue?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm present. Sorry, I had my volume down.
Okay.
Oh,
So all members are present virtually.
thank you, Michelle. May I have approval of the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the agenda. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The agenda is approved. May I have approval of the, oh dear, I think I have the Oh, okay, I've got it. May I have approval of the November 10th, 2020 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none.
Quick point. Oh,
Sure.
there is a minor typo under number 3, policies for first reading. There's an O that should be on.
Thank you for pointing that out, Board Member Levy.
I'll get it.
Michelle? Thank you. Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of approving the November 10th, 2020 minutes with that correction, please say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion of the minutes. All right, and that brings us up to the policies for first reading. And the first one is Policy 511, Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity Employment. Dr. Kieser is, I don't see him. Is Rob going to be present?
So Rob had texted or reached out to me this morning saying he's not feeling well, so he has Susan Love from his office attending this evening to help us with the questions and going through policy.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Susan. May I call you Susan or Ms. Love or?
Susan is fine, thank you.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
All right, now we left these because we needed a little bit more information and
So, Board Member Jacobs, do we want to go in order, or do we left off with number 2B last time? So we can either go back to that, or we could follow the agenda as printed.
Yeah, you're correct. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Policy 520.1, the military leave policy. I need to pull that one up. And Board Member Leave, if I remember correctly, which I'm questioning since I forgot about the last one, did you have some concerns on that one or questions?
Oh, I submitted all of my concerns, so they're embedded. So if we just go through the policy, I think that should be sufficient.
Awesome, thank you. I keep muting myself. Okay, so I will read through it and see if there's any, is that probably the best way, Superintendent Kieser, just to start reading through, and if someone has a question or concern, we can pause. That sound good?
That sounds good. Do we want to start with policy 511, or do we want to pick up with policy 520.1?
I'm open. Board members? Any preference? No?
No
Okay.
preference.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's just go with the military leave then.
Start with
All right, so,
Okay.
okay. So, the military leave policy 520.1, the attorney recommends eliminating this policy in its entirety and replacing it with the following statement. The School District of Beloit will provide military leave and the accompanying benefits as required by the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Right Acts of 1994, USERRA, and Wisconsin state law. The specific policies and benefits are provided in the employee handbook. Susan, could you speak to this a little bit for the reasoning behind that?
Yes, there are, you'll see that in a number of these policies. Historically, there have been policies that are included in the board policies and then policies that the board has included in the employee handbook. And rather than have those duplicative policies, for ease of use, it's recommended that the policies that are really employment related be incorporated in your handbook and then merely referenced in the board policy. And particularly when you're referencing the laws rather than spelling it all out, because those are subject to change. And so our recommendation is that you simply recognize that you have these legal obligations. And then if you want to expand on that and include details, you would incorporate that in your handbook.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. That makes sense to me. Comments from other board members?
Oh, I don't know if you saw my question.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. My only concern is, so I reviewed the policies and provided feedback. I have not reviewed the employee handbook to the depth that I've reviewed the policies. So is that something we also need to do simultaneously to make sure that there's not something conflicting how we're updating the policies in the employee handbook?
That's a good point. Superintendent Keiser?
So the employee handbook is not something that the board reviews and approves. It's an administrative handbook, so it is something that we that HR and through the working group that Tanya is putting together would be a document that they would be working on as a collaborative process.
Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Keiser. Then I would say, since the board has jurisdiction over policy, and it sounds like the employee handbook is the domain of the administration, I wouldn't reference the employee handbook in policy when that's not under our purview.
Board Member Wong?
I guess I go back to Susan's comment, and it's something that I think that, I've tried to understand regarding policy as well, is just, if we are referring to something that is, a national law or national policy, referencing it versus having to change the policy over and over within our policies, because if there is a change, then we would have to go in and change it according to the laws that were changed nationally or at a state level. Is that correct, Susan?
That's correct.
Okay. So therefore, if it is in the handbook included in there, then we don't have to do that and have to have this constant keeping up to date on the latest changes that are going on at a whole nother level. Those changes will automatically occur, and therefore we don't have to update it. I did have a question, though, in regards to the employee handbook, because it has been, and I think I brought this up to Dr. Keiser as well, it has been some time since that handbook has been updated. In fact, it's been 5 years. So that needs a thorough going through. In fact, Board Member Jacobs is still employed by our district according to our handbook, and the number of other people are still employed as well. So I think that, we have to go through that and review that thoroughly if we are going to reference that.
I would definitely agree with you, Board Member Wong. I do remember you saying that last time now, because I was wondering where my paycheck was, but I guess I understand now. Dr. Keiser, just on a quick aside, and I'm getting off, I apologize. Not really, because it ties into Board Member Levy's reference to the handbook. So if we're going to go with and I personally tend to go with the suggestion by the lawyers, how are we going to, can you assure us that this is going to be taken care of with the employee handbook being updated like this year?
Yes, in fact, I had met with Ms. Williams to talk about the timeline that she has for the work group to come together and start the work on the employee handbook and the updates to that. She's planning on sending out, she has the team for facilitating it, and she's sent out an email as of today asking for people who are interested in being a part of the working group to reach out to her, and I'll let Ms. Williams talk a little bit more about what she has in line for the scope of how that will come together. It is to be noted that even though the employee handbook has not been updated in 5 years, it still is in force, and so the information in there would be still something that we would be subject to following, absent policy language that would supersede that.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
Hi, good evening, everyone. So yes, I did send out an email today looking for employee representation from all of our different employee groups. The idea behind this process is to create a diverse working group that promotes equity and inclusion. Each of the representatives would solicit feedback from each of their respective employee groups, in turn educate each of their employee groups on the content, the processes, the updates, in hopes that we're able to break down some of the communication challenges between each of the employee groups. The timeline will be early 2021 when we're mapping out our dates with meeting with each of the employee representatives. So that will be really robust at the very beginning until we have a final product to go to the superintendent for approval. And then once that's finalized, this working group is fluid in terms of when we're updating policies and processes, that we're reconnecting with each of those employee representative groups. So in turn, we can go over the content and solicit feedback on new policies and processes that come up.
Thank you, Ms. Williams, for that explanation. Committee Member Wong?
Yeah, Ms. Williams, thanks for that information. It's very helpful, and it sounds like it's a good process that you're going through. What was the selection process for the members on that committee?
So right now, Wendy LaPointe, the finance director, and Eric Weir, who is the director of student services and special ed, are co-facilitating with me. We're asking for 2 representatives from each of the employee groups. BEA and SBU, the secretarial union group, has asked that they select their members. So when we send out the email, we're just asking for interest right now. And if we have more than 2 representatives from each of the groups, we'll do some sort of lottery system. If we're not able to get 2 employee representatives from each of the groups, I will go out and solicit again for representation, or even ask maybe our building administrators. So that's what we're looking at right now. And I'm open to feedback if anybody has any suggestions. If we have more than 1 person, more than 2 people for each of the employee groups, or if we don't have the 2 people.
I guess my only comment on that is, I mean, it sounds like it's a relatively small group. You're talking about 7 people total?
So we actually have about 5 different employee groups.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so
okay. Sorry.
The whole idea is that we would have a kickoff meeting with all of the employee representatives, and then we would break out into smaller groups and then meet with each of the representatives individually.
Okay. My only comment would be just make sure you have a diverse group of individuals that represent the entire district.
Agreed.
All right, so where are we at, committee members, then, with this policy? Committee member Levy?
like to reiterate, since the board controls policy and the employee handbook is controlled by administration, I'm not comfortable with referencing the employee handbook because if it's not congruent, we don't have any authority to put it in sync. So I just think we need to just make sure that the policy is clear and let the administration handle the employee handbook.
So if I'm hearing correctly then, you would prefer to see the entire policy written out?
No, not at all. Like, I'm fine with replacing it with URSA. That seems completely reasonable. But that last sentence that says if specific policies and benefits are provided in the employee handbook, I would not reference the employee handbook at all in policy because if it's not congruent, we don't have the authority to update it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for the clarification. Committee Member Wong?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that if we stick with the national policy, the federal policy, but I would agree. I think that not referencing it in the policy would be appropriate.
Okay, so then we would just take off the specific policies and benefits that are provided in the employee handbook. And then Susan, that would be fine legally?
Yes, that would be fine.
Awesome. Okay. Is there any further discussion or questions regarding this policy? Are we ready to move this forward? Oh, Board Member Levy, I'm not keeping track of the chat very well. Did you want to say something?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion here. Let's move to recommend to the full Board of Education the approval of the addition and layover of policy 520.1 military leave policy for the first reading with the deletion or according to the attorney's advice, with the deletion of the specific policy and benefits will be provided in the employee handbook. Did I get that right?
Could I just say the last?
May I offer a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because we're deleting the entire policy and replacing it with URSA, correct?
Correct.
So I would say the deletion of policy 520.1 as it's currently written, and that policy will be replaced with URSA, and that any mention of the employee handbook would be removed.
I will second that.
All right. We have a motion. Before I go any further, is this me or am I sounding like I'm in a tunnel? Can you all hear me clearly, or is it just on my end? Okay. So we have a motion and a second for the deletion of the current policy 520.1 and that it will be replaced with URSA with the last sentence in regard to the employee handbook being taken off. Any questions or discussions? Did I say that correctly? Okay, none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? All right. The new policy 520.1 military leave will be replaced with URSA will be put into effect. Or excuse me, will not be put into effect. Will be moved to the full board for a first reading. Thank you. Now we're at policy 522 staff conduct.
Are we going to go back to the beginning with the affirmative action, or are we moving in a different order?
Oh, I was just going to go down and then go back, but we can sure go back if you want.
Nope, that's fine.
Oh, okay. All right. Policy 522 staff conduct. The attorney recommends deleting the entire policy and adding the following language only. All staff are expected to behave according to the expectations outlined in detail in the employee handbook. Failure to adhere to those expectations may result in disciplinary action. Questions, comments? I personally like that because I think some of the, and I think Board Member Levy, it was some of your comments I agreed with. I think some of those things that were listed in the original were, I don't know, I believe you wrote at one point, Board Member Levy, under compassion, I'm uncomfortable with legislating this. Some of these are things that it's different for different people. So I do personally like the idea of deleting it and going with the behaviors of the staff handbook. Anyone else? Committee Member Wong.
I think Committee Member Levy was ahead of me.
I would love for Susan to give us some feedback because for the same reason as we remove the reference of the employee handbook, when we're writing policy, we can't refer to something that we have, to a document that we have no control over. But I am confused by the way this is written because of all of the comments that I listed. Susan, is there a general statement that we can use, like that staff are expected to act in a professional manner or something that covers the spirit of what we want to make sure happens without attempting to list every type of behavior that we are either looking for or trying to prevent against?
Yes, the answer to that. I think that if you want to have one general comment or statement is that employees are expected, I would go beyond just saying professional behavior, but I think that as a policy, you could say that you expect all employees to adhere to any employment expectations, and I think you could say, including those that are spelled out in your employee handbook. Now, you don't have to do that, but it's pointing employees to what the expectations are. And your expectations as a board are that your superintendent and your administrators are going to set a standard of what their expectations are for the employees, the given expectations for performance and conduct. So, but if you don't want to refer to the employee handbook or policies that have been adopted by managers and supervisors of the district, then I think you could adopt a statement that says professional conduct and expectations of performance or something to that effect.
Committee Member Wong?
So, Susan, that would be in the policy language or in the employee handbook?
No, that would be in your policy language.
Okay.
Your handbook would be what would contain the more extensive list of expectations and expected conduct. So
Okay.
the things that are in this policy that are near the end that talk about don't violate the board policy, don't refuse any, don't engage in insubordination, those kinds of details would be incorporated in your handbook. but you wouldn't want to incorporate them here, though currently they are.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Gloria?
No, go ahead. I'm thinking.
And I've got some language, but go ahead, that I thought I'd throw up. But go ahead, please, Committee Member Levy.
All right, so in the spirit of true transparency, I just did a quick Google search. It'll take about a minute for me to read it, and then give me some feedback, please. All staff are expected to maintain a high level of professional behavior. The hallmarks of professional behavior include, but are not limited to, honesty and integrity, treating individuals with courtesy, respect, and dignity, working in a collaborative and cooperative manner with all staff, and complying with all health system practices and procedures. Unprofessional behavior is prohibited by this policy and includes, but is not limited to, spoken, written, virtual, cyberbullying, and physical conduct and expressions that are threatening. So I think that gives us like a broad framework of the spirit of what we're trying to get at without going down into the specifics of how adults should respond and should act, that for my taste get too detailed.
Well, Board Member, or Committee Member Levy, I must say yours was much better written than what I jotted down just a minute ago. I do have a question, though. Didn't that mention compassion, too, and I don't have a problem with it, but I'm just rereading the notes that you wrote before. Was it what was making you uncomfortable when they were giving the definition of what compassion was?
What made me uncomfortable was like if something happened and you were required to apologize, and I mean in general I subscribe to that, but I'm not comfortable with legislating like if an incident occurs that we're requiring, like now you have to go apologize with legislating specific behavior. Like if something happens, this is what we are expecting or requiring you to do. That made me uncomfortable. With the one that I just read, and again, not my words, I just Googled them, treating individuals with courtesy, respect, and dignity. Like that I can totally get on board with, but the specific remedies for how situations should be resolved, I think is just not in our lane.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Keyser.
I just want to take the opportunity, and I appreciate Board Member Levy that you Googled it, because I agree with the language you used, because it talks about in policy establishing the what. So this is what the board is saying they want employee or staff conduct to be to live within. So that gives the parameters by which, when the employee handbook is being developed, we can look to that and say, are we living up to those values or those guides that policy is putting forward? So I like the language.
I did as well. Do you mind reading it again, Board Member Levy?
Sure. And Board Secretary Shope, if you want, I will email you a screenshot. That might be easier. But yeah, I'll read it. It says all staff are expected to maintain the highest level of professional behavior. The hallmarks of professional behavior include, but are not limited to, honesty and integrity, treating individuals with courtesy, respect, and dignity, working in a collaborative and cooperative manner with all other staff, and complying with all health system policies and procedures. Unprofessional behavior is prohibited by this policy and includes, but is not limited to, spoken, written, virtual, cyberbullying, and physical conduct and expressions that are threatening.
Thank you. Yes, if you could do the screenshot with Ms. Shope, that would be awesome.
please, and thank you.
No problem. I'm emailing it now.
While we're waiting, Committee Member Wong, did you have anything?
Yeah, I had a question. So who determines like the unprofessional behavior? Who determines that? Is that the manager or the supervisor, the superintendent, or the board?
So in the spirit of the policy, we would look at the employee handbook and say, okay, we've identified what is the guideposts for professional conduct, and then what is prohibited, and build our specifics within that. So the employee handbook would have to dissect out those particular pieces.
So in that case, we're not allowing the policy to be the decision-making mechanism. It's coming from the employee handbook and guided that way, correct?
Correct. So the administration, district administration and building administration would be having to live within those rules. So the working group would advise the details within the employee handbook. Once the employee handbook is reviewed and approved by myself, then those would become the guideposts for how we would operate day to day within the district.
Ms. Williams?
Sorry, I think Dr. Keyser just covered what I was going to chime in about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
You skipped over Board Member Levy.
I apologize, Board Member Levy.
Just a question for the administration. Isn't there already kind of like a chain of command? If something happens with the teacher, then the building principal handles it. If something happens with the building principal, it might whoever their supervisor. So there's not one size fits all, but there is an established chain of command, because I don't want to. I think it should be governed by policy. If you also use the handbook as a guide, that's fine, but I'm not comfortable with replacing the policy with the handbook. So as long as it's in conjunction, that's fine. And I guess to Susan, my question is, do we need to outline that we're going to follow the chain of command when determining if a staff member is out of compliance with this policy?
Normally, the actual process would not be in your policy. You might want to add to the statement that employees who do not comply or do not meet these expectations will be subject to discipline up to and including termination. So that you spell out in your policy the consequence of not meeting the standards, but then the determination of whether someone is meeting those standards would fall to the supervisors, and then you're, of course, subject to any grievance process that you might have.
I think that's a really good addition, just to wrap it up.
I have a question. Ms. Shope?
Yes.
Are we supposed to be able to see the screenshot?
Well, you just emailed it to me so I could add the verbiage into the minutes. I didn't know
Oh.
if anybody wanted it projected.
Oh, I misunderstood. I'm
Understood.
I'm fine with it unless committee members Wong or Levy would like to see it, or Dr. or anyone actually.
Are we okay with adding what Susan just recommended about the consequence statement, and then we would just follow standard protocol?
You got a thumbs up from Superintendent Kieser, a nod from, yep, and a thumbs up, okay. Yes, and I agree. So.
If I could make one other comment, in what was read, there's a reference to health system, and I think that must be, when you Googled it, that must come from that type of employment entity, and I would suggest that you probably want to replace that with a reference to the school district.
Yes and yes. And I kept it because of our current pandemic situation, but we may want to change it to comply with all health protocols. That might make more sense for our environment.
All right, committee members, where are we at then with this?
If Michelle could read back everything with the edits we've kind of interjected, I think we're ready to move on.
Thank
I would
you.
agree.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Scholl.
Okay, can I ask one clarifying question before I read?
Of course.
So after Ms. Love's comment and then Ms. Levy's reply, am I to have something in there about both the, like, following the health protocols and complying with all district policies and procedures? I wasn't sure if I was supposed to have both.
From my perspective, that last bullet point, if you just had complying with all approved health protocols, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
And then with Susan's addition about the consequence if it's not followed to end it.
Do I have a nod from you, committee member Wong? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Is it possible to, Michelle, can you put that up on the screen?
I think so.
She's
I'm
working
not
as
sure,
well.
so it'll just take me a minute.
Okay, that's fine.
I just need to add Ms. Love's statement too. Could I get clarification? Once you started that, did you start that with failure to follow or failure to comply? Ms. Love, is that how you started your sentence?
You're very, very garbled. You want to add something that says to the effect, any employee who fails to meet
Okay.
these expectations.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna throw this into a Word doc quick so I can throw it up on the screen. Sorry, if you can bear with me just a tiny bit here.
No, that's fine. Take your time. There we go. There we go. Thank you, Michelle. All right, so all staff are expected to maintain the highest level of professional behavior. The hallmarks of professional behavior include, but are not limited to, honesty and integrity, treating individuals with courtesy, respect, and dignity, working in a collaborative and cooperative manner with all other staff, and complying with all approved health protocols. Unprofessional behavior is prohibited by this policy and includes, but is not limited to, spoken, written, virtual, cyberbullying, and physical conduct and expressions that are threatening. And the employee who fails to meet these expectations will be subject to discipline up to and including termination. And the only word that, and I'm just would like to keep constant, and Ms. Williams, tell me if I'm incorrect, don't we generally say including dismissal? Am I being too nitpicky?
I think the language that we have included is appropriate. You're saying the same thing.
Okay, that's fine.
Currently in the handbook, it says including termination of employment.
It does? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Committee Member Wong. All right, committee members, what are we thinking?
I move to replace policy 522 as it is currently written with what the committee has crafted this evening.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to replace our current policy 522 staff conduct with the policy as stated. Are there any questions or discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Scho, for putting that up for us on the screen.
Welcome.
You know what? Oh goodness, do I need a friendly amendment? I did not say to pass it on to the full board in our motion. Do I need to go back and?
I thought I heard Ms. Levy say that. Did she not?
She probably did, and I didn't.
I don't believe I did, but anything that's approved in this committee, isn't that the natural workflow that it goes on to the full board?
Okay. So
I'm asking.
You are correct.
That is the natural.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be stated in the motion then?
No, typically we do just so that people understand that's the flow, but anything that comes out of committee, that's the natural flow as it goes then to the full board for approval.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
All right, so we are now on pre-employment drug testing, 522.11. And let's see, on
We
this,
skipped one, Stephanie.
excuse me?
We skipped one, the 522.1, employee drug and alcohol use.
I sure did. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so employee drug and alcohol use. All right, 522.1. This one, all right, it says we've got procedures and policies related to the district's authority over, okay, it is, okay, our attorney has written that the procedures and policies are provided in the employee handbook. Susan, so what does that mean exactly? That we don't need to have anything here, or?
No, what it means is, so there are three different, well, actually four if you look at pre-employment, but for existing employees, there are three policies.
Mm-hmm.
There's this policy statement, and then there's a procedures policy or a statement of procedures, and then there's, which is, I think, Rule 1, and then Rule 2 is testing.
Okay.
And in keeping with the concept of your policies, the board's policies being a statement of policy, and then the implementation of that policy being in the employee handbook or in procedures that are adopted by administration, we've recommended that the Rule 1 and 2 be eliminated. And instead, you modify this broader statement and include, now we've added the very last sentence, again, references the handbook. If you don't want to reference the handbook, that's fine. But I do think that what you want to do is include a statement that that the district, that employees will be subject or may be subject to drug testing and discipline for violating the drug and alcohol use policy.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Kieser?
You asked Ms. Love, and she just stated what I was going to share. So we're good.
Okay. All right. Thoughts or comments, committee members? And how you'd like to proceed? Dr. Kieser?
Based on what Ms. Love had shared, going through the opening statement in terms of how we wanted to craft it, and then go through that piece perhaps first, and then think about what that ending statement might sound like. It could be modeled after what we had just discussed in the previous policy in terms of all employees are subject to, and use the verbiage that Ms. Love had shared.
Okay. So what if we did the school district of Beloit prohibits the possession, consumption, manufacture, sale, distribution, dispensation, and abuse of any drug, paraphernalia, narcotics, or any other controlled substance or alcohol at any time. Okay, Dr. Caesar's not in here. Dr. Wong. So that you doctorate, Committee Member Wong.
I'm not going to doctor that at all. My question goes back to the employee handbook phrase, and it seems as though I'm okay with that language in there. I think that the additional sentence at the end there about procedures and policies related to the district's authority over testing and discipline employees, I mean, how do we reference that in the employee handbook? As Board Member Levy had previously stated, since we don't officially have jurisdiction over the employee handbook, I don't know. I feel like we need to have a reference point of some form, or I don't know. I guess maybe she can help out with that, or Dr. Kieser has some comments on that.
Dr. Kieser?
Yes, Board Member Wong, I was referring to, like, instead of the last line being the procedures and policies, Ms. Love had shared something to the effect of all employees are subject to drug testing and failure, and are subject to drug testing and potential disciplinary action as a result of that, or crafting language around that and taking out the language around the employee handbook. All of those details, the procedural pieces that Ms. Love was referring to, would be taken and put into the employee handbook so that employees would know how that would be carried out.
Board Member Levy?
So a few things. Unless there's something I'm missing, distribution and dispensation seem similar enough to me that we don't need both of those. And then my question is alcohol considered a controlled substance? If not, do we need to add alcohol? And then I don't know how detailed it is, but would it be appropriate to include what those policies and procedures around drug testing are, so we don't have to reference the employee handbook for the same reasons that we've mentioned earlier? And then I get that it's clear if someone fails a drug test that there will be consequences for that, but what if someone refuses a drug test, and do we need to outline that in the policy?
Let me respond to a couple of those things. I tend to agree with you that distribution and dispensation seem to mean the same thing, but in the enforcement of crimes related to drugs and alcohol, those are both used, and they are not used necessarily interchangeably. So one of the things you want to make sure is that you don't have someone who says, well, I wasn't distributing them, I was dispensing them, and you haven't included that language. So that's the first part of it. The second is that alcohol is not considered a controlled substance, and so you do want to add that. I think in the original, or in the other draft, they were just kept as two separate things, but you could modify it and say controlled substance or alcohol at any time. The reason there was language, and I noticed you had another question in there about the draft that said, or not being free of, and that was added because of unemployment compensation. And the Department of Workforce Development believes that if your policy doesn't say that you have to be free of those, that there's an expectation that there's a standard that has to be met, and then they fall back on, it would be the district's burden to prove that the person was under the influence, which then becomes, what does that mean? What level of a drug or what level of alcohol? So generally you include in your policy the or not being free of, because that means if they come to work and they have any level of drugs or alcohol in their system, then they would be violating this policy. The final.
May I interject there really quick? And the reason I lined that out, because it starts with prohibit and then says not being free. So like prohibiting a negative, it read to me, unless I'm missing something, that our stated expectation is that you are not free of drugs, that you have drugs in your system, the way it was worded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't read clearly.
But with that explanation, I think it definitely needs to be added, so it's not a nuance of, well, how much of the drug did you have in your system? We just can't say that we prohibit not being free of, because that means that the expectation is that you do have drugs in your system when you come to work.
Okay, yeah.
Board Member Wong?
I believe Miss Williams is ahead of me.
Ms. Williams, I am just, tonight, please, thank you.
No worries at all. I know there was a question regarding if an employee refuses testing, and so I just wanted to provide some clarification. There is language in this policy that talks about refusal in the consent form. We do have a consent form that when a situation like this arises, at that time, the employee would be provided that consent form. There is language in that form that talks about the refusal, and that would result in corrective action up to and including termination of employment. So that is out there and clarified.
Ms. Williams, is that in one of the rules, or is that in the handbook, or like how is that connected to the policy?
So this is actually in policy 522.1. Under the board, establishing reasonable cause, individualized decision.
Is that under one of the rules, or is it 5?
I'm sorry, 5.1 Rule 2.
Okay.
And while we're picking
And
up,
then kind of last point, was it stated earlier that we were trying to get rid of the rules and consolidate?
Right.
So that would need to be added to 522.1.
It is in the handbook.
But are we consistently not referencing the handbook because we don't have, that's not in our purview?
Before I say something, Board Member Wong, you had a question. Or
No, that's what I was going to bring up. It is in the employee handbook, so it's referenced there. But since we're trying to be consistent as far as not referencing the handbook, I think we have to build that in someplace. And I think having that rule too, I guess, Susan, do you have any comments on that? I mean, eliminating those rules is taking a lot of the meat away from the rule itself.
I think that I don't think that you want to have those detailed rules regarding testing as a policy statement. I do think, and I was trying to work here as you were talking about what kind of language can we incorporate, and I think that you could incorporate a broader statement about the testing, so that any process or procedure you're using for testing, and I had any violation, an employee is subject to drug and alcohol testing. Failure to cooperate with testing or a a negative test, there's a word missing there, I think, a negative test shall result in discipline up to and including termination. So now that so what I added, so we start out with the general statement, prohibits the possession, etc. And then reporting for work with any alcohol or non-prescribed drug in an employee's system is prohibited. An employee is subject to drug and alcohol testing, failure to cooperate with testing, or a negative test result shall result in discipline up to and including termination.
All right. Thank you, Susan. We have Dr. Keyser, and then Board Member Levy and Board Member Wong.
Thank you, Ms. Love, for the language. All I was going to comment on Board Member Wong's, the elimination of the rules does not take away the meat. If the overarching policy, this one, talks about that this is the environment that we want our employees to operate within, and failure to do that is subject to discipline up to and including. So how the discipline is carried out, the details of that are what would be incorporated within the employee handbook. So I think as long as there's that statement like Ms. Love was starting to craft, would encompass those other two policies not needing to be in policy language. It could be built out within the employee handbook.
Thank you, Dr. Keyser. Board Member Levy?
So two things. The first, Susan, thank you so much for that on-the-spot verbiage. I appreciate it. Do we need to reference and dosage as prescribed? Because let's say I'm prescribed oxycodone, that's fine for me to take, but if I take 7 pills instead of 1.5, then I have a problem. Do we need that level of specificity? Is that similar to what we just discussed with not being or under the influence, et cetera, like at any level that we include that appropriate dosage? And then if I'm understanding correctly what we're discussing, it seems like the processes that are spelled out in our rules, we would collapse those into the policy, which brings me to a broader point just for my clarification. Is there a reason that we have rules associated with policies to spell things out that we don't just always include it in the policy? I just want to make sure there's not something that I'm missing.
I'll take a first stab at answering your second question, Board Member Levy, and then I'll defer to Ms. Love from the legal aspect. So previous boards who had adopted policy and rules have thought of the policies as our what's and the rules as the how's, and previous boards have adopted the standpoint of wanting to establish some of the how's in policy. The recommendation that Rob had put forward in terms of taking those pieces out are to provide the overarching what's, which is what we've been talking about, and then leaving the hows, because those things may ebb and flow. If a rule was very narrowly prescribed and said this is the only way to do it, because it would be written into policy, we would have no obligation or no opportunity to go in a different route. We would have to follow that when unless we were to change it. By having those rules be in the handbook, those can be updated as needed as things ebb and flow, while still keeping the overarching theme of we want a drug-free workplace, and but violating that drug-free workplace, there's going to be discipline. Now, turn to Ms. Love if there's anything you want to correct on my statement, or
No, I think that's exactly where we're headed. And on the other comment, yes, and so I added, I do think you want to recognize that using prescribed drugs, or using them in a dosage in excess of the prescribed dosage would also be a violation.
I think we skipped Board Member Wong, did we?
No, you were going in the right order. I think Dr. Kieser was just answering Board Member Levy's question.
Did you want to say something? No?
Yeah, actually, I think that I like the revised policy. I think that Dr. Kieser, how you described that is exactly, I think, how we need to be looking at this. It simplifies it. It doesn't make us, put us in a box. So, and I appreciate that. I think it's much simplified. It creates a policy. It doesn't get into the details that we don't need to be getting into that will probably be changing over time.
Thank you, Board Member Wong. Dr. Kieser?
My questions are already answered, so you can skip me.
Okay, so I'm just concerned about legality. So, and I agree with everything that's been said, but if we're going to go, if I'm understanding this correctly, we're going to go a little bit with less is more. And I guess, Dr. Kieser, maybe this is directed at you then. So, for example, if a principal would suspect an employee of being under the influence of something, we would have, I just want to make sure that legally, if we're not writing everything out in set stone, is there something somewhere for the workplace, or maybe Susan, you can help out? Do you know what I'm getting at? I'm just wondering if we don't, I just want to make sure legally, if we suspect someone of something, that we're following correct legal procedures.
Yes, and as you said that, I added to the drug testing language, an employee is subject to drug and alcohol testing as allowed by law. And the procedures that you have in Rule 1 and Rule 2 that are currently in use are legally compliant. And so you would continue to do that. So your broader policy directive is you're going to be tested in accordance with the law. And
okay.
Administration would implement the procedures to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Williams.
Hi, thank you. So I also wanted to let everybody know that so we have a process document. We have all of the forms. So when a leader calls and has reasonable suspicion about an employee, usually their first stop is HR to kind of talk through what they're observing. And so then we walk through the process as well. So they have the tools in the toolbox to address that situation as it comes up. Last year, I educated all the administrators on that process, and that's all in a Google Share document. So they know where that documentation is posted. And then moving forward, when we have new administrators come on board, that would be part of the onboarding process. So they know that process is out there.
And as a retired administrator, I really appreciate that, Ms. Williams. I'm not sure that I ever received that training, and kind of hit the ground running a few times. So I think that's one. Thank you.
Thanks. And I do have a follow-up question to Board Member Levy's question about the dosage and putting that in policy, because I understand what the concern is there. And I'm just wondering, maybe a question for Susan, is there an opportunity to put language in there about like a fitness for duty? So if somebody is being prescribed a medication and they're impaired on the job, what does that look like in terms of a fitness for duty versus a reasonable suspicion process?
Okay, so typically with there's an expectation that employees report to work fit to perform their duties. And if someone reports for work and they're exhibiting signs that they're impaired and there's a belief, a reasonable suspicion that they are impaired by alcohol or drugs, you would proceed with testing as provided by the policy. And then with the testing procedures, any positive test result has to be reviewed by a medical review officer who will then talk to the employee and say, this is the drug that showed up in the positive test, and give the employee an opportunity to respond, well, that's because I'm taking this specific prescribed medication. And if they are taking a prescribed medication in accordance with the legal prescription, then it's not a positive test. But then it allows you as the employer the opportunity to address the issue of reporting and being impaired and fit for duty. And so that then becomes a separate issue than the drug test. And it does not excuse the drug test, because if an employee says, well, yes, I'm a little out of it because I'm taking my prescribed medication, you don't want to be, or you don't want your administrators to be in a position to have to judge, oh, okay, they told me they were taking this prescribed medication. They go into the process, it gets evaluated in accordance with that process, and you ultimately determine they didn't violate your policy if it comes out that they actually were using the prescribed medication in accordance with the dosage prescribed.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Levy.
So just a couple questions. So I guess the first is, and maybe the answer is that we don't cover this in policy, but let's say that a teacher comes in and is either suspicion of being under the influence or they're not fit for duty, whichever the case may be. What happens to that teacher's responsibilities and duties while all of this is being sorted out? So if I'm a building principal and I'm concerned about one of my teachers, like who takes over that? Does that level of nuance need to be included in policy? Is that becoming a how this is executed and no longer a what? Susan, what guidance do you have for that?
Yeah, generally, that's more of a how, okay? So you've said this is our policy, and then if you determine that someone appears to be impaired, that moves you out of the policy into the procedure. What are the next steps? And that answers all those questions of, okay, we're going to test them or we're not going to test them. We're going to, send them home. We're going to call in a sub. All of those things that you do become the procedure and not the policy itself.
Perfect. And then I just remembered my second question. What if the most senior person in the building is the one that is affected? So if the building principal comes in and the secretary thinks the principal might be impaired, is there some type of reporting, or how does that structurally work if it's the person at the top that is experiencing the issue?
I'm not sure what your process is, but they would be treated no differently than any other employee. So if they come in and someone suspects them, that needs to be reported so that action can be taken. And I'm assuming that's going to be in your procedures, your handbook as to, or your procedures as to how you're going to handle anyone at any level coming in under the influence.
Perfect. Thank you.
Dr. Keyser.
Ms. Love answered the questions, so I'm good.
And I'm good as well, because mine got answered. So are we ready to perhaps have Susan read over what she has? And if you wouldn't mind, Susan?
Let me read it.
Thank you.
The school district, and this is starting from the policy as it's drafted, but the school district of Beloit prohibits the possession, consumption, manufacture, sale, distribution, dispensation, abuse of any drugs, drug paraphernalia, narcotics, or any other controlled substance, or alcohol at any time, period. Reporting for work with any alcohol, non-prescribed drug, or prescribed drug in excess of prescribed dosage in an employee's system is prohibited. An employee is subject to drug and alcohol testing as allowed by law. Failure to cooperate with testing or a negative test result may result in discipline up to and including termination.
Thank you, Susan. I love that. Board members?
I do have a question. What about, is there supposed to be language in there about not being free of?
Yeah, what I put in there was reporting with any.
Okay, and that's sufficient
Yeah.
according to the, okay. Just wanted to make clear on that. Okay, thanks.
Board member Levy?
I think at the end I heard you say a negative drug test, and that should be positive.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, but other than that, I think that sounds great. So we would be getting rid of 522.1 Rule 1 and Rule 2?
Yes.
Okay.
I see you nodding your head, Board member Wong.
Yeah, I was just agreeing. Yeah, that's correct.
I like it too. I think it's a lot more simplistic. Everything's in one spot. I think it reads well. Thank you so much, Susan.
Sure thing.
Okay.
Okay, I would like to move approval to the full board for the revision and layover of policy 522.1 employee drug and alcohol use, as Susan had outlined there. Is that appropriate? And also the deletion of 522.1 Rule 1 and the deletion of 522.1 Rule 2.
Second?
Okay, now, Board member Wong, I'll try and repeat back. We have a motion and a second for 522.1 employee drug and alcohol use to use the verbiage that Susan has written, and the deletion of 522.1 Rule 1, drug and alcohol use admin procedures, and 522.1 Rule 2, drug and alcohol testing, to be deleted, and for this to go to the full board. Any questions or discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed. All right. The motion carries, and that will go to the full board. All right. That took a little bit of time, but I think we did some really good work. Now I believe we are at, let's see, we did the pre-employment drug testing. All right. Letter F. Policy 522.2, employee misconduct. Policy 522.2, Rule 1, guidelines for reporting employee misconduct.
I think we skipped E.
Did I do that again? Thank you, Board Member Levy. I am not on my game tonight. Policy 522.11, pre-employment drug, yeah, that's an important one. Pre-employment drug testing. Policy 522.11, Rule 1, pre-employment drug testing procedures. All right. And on this one, Board Member Levy, you're green, right? Are your comments in the green, or?
No, I think that's attorney comments. Mine have AL after.
Okay, thank you. Susan, could you speak to this, please?
Yes, and I may have a different recommendation based on the discussions that have gone on so far.
Okay.
Because this is pre-employment, this would not be included in your employee handbook. And so what we did here was laid out what might be the testing procedure for pre-employment. However, you could, instead of having the detailed testing procedure, have your general policy statement and then a statement that the superintendent will develop an appropriate pre-employment testing procedure, so that the actual procedure for implementation is delegated by policy to the superintendent, and then that into all those the 2 paragraphs about the testing procedure could be removed from the policy.
Okay, thank you. And again, I'm assuming that there's Wisconsin law written in regard to all of this that would be privy to HR, correct?
Yes, there's case law regarding the ability to conduct drug tests.
Okay. So we would just maybe have just a brief paragraph then stating, Susan, is that your recommendation?
Yes, I think you could do that, where you could say just as it says, a pre-employment drug test shall be required as a condition of employment. All pre-employment drug tests shall be completed prior to the beginning of job duties or prior to employment offers. And then it says human resources will schedule a drug test. I don't think you need to go into that. What I would do is, after you say it shall be completed prior to the beginning of job duties, you say the superintendent shall be responsible for developing appropriate pre-employment testing procedures. Appropriate and lawful pre-employment testing procedures.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Levy, do you want to speak to where you put consideration of employment? Can you just, yes, speak to that, please?
Well, I guess I just have a couple questions. So currently, how are we doing it now? So where in the application process does the drug screening come in? Is it, of course, it would be after the interview, but I don't see the value unless I'm missing something with offering someone a job and then drug testing them. Because if it comes back positive, like has that paperwork already gone to policy and personnel, et cetera, does it make sense to do that before an offer is extended? So, for example, you have the interview, and during the time when you're checking references, et cetera, that's when candidates are drug tested. So that's why I put in consideration of and then employment offers instead of beginning duties. And what is our current, I guess I'm not clear on why we're removing human resources will schedule a drug test, if that is our policy now and if it is working, because the option of the superintendent will create, is that the case? Because I'm certain we have a policy now, and if it works, why would the superintendent have to create something different?
So I can't speak to what you're currently doing, but in terms of the removal of the will schedule the drug test, that's because that's part of the testing process, which I think you could remove from your policy statement. And so I'm not saying that human resources wouldn't schedule the drug test and tell them when, or all of the other things that are specified there as to how the process works. But that would be process. It wouldn't be part of your policy. And you could say that human resources will be responsible for developing, or the superintendent. I mean, you can choose whoever you want to be responsible for developing the appropriate testing procedures, but I think that's part of the procedures.
Unmute, Amy.
You're muted.
Thank you. So are you recommending that everything that's outlined in testing procedures brought over from Rule 1, that we should omit that?
Yes.
Okay.
Board Member Wong?
What if we put in the human resource, we put in the district will schedule the drug test and provide candidate with appointment and time, location? I guess that's just a more broader term, and it's not throwing it onto any one specific area, even though right now it might be under the human resource area. The second question I had is, if we're going to have the superintendent develop the procedure, the test procedure, who's responsible for, is that something that each superintendent's going to go in and monitor and adjust as time goes on? And maybe that's just something that the board doesn't need to be involved in, but I guess my concern is it's done once. How often is it going to be reviewed and changed over time? Is that going to be something that HR is going to keep an eye on?
I would say from a legal perspective, the law is pretty settled in that area. But from a practical perspective, how you conduct your testing, who handles it, what that process and procedure is going to look like, normally doesn't change much unless you're changing providers, where you're actually having the testing done. So I don't anticipate that it would change frequently, but it could, which is also why the procedure is separate from the policy, because then you could have that change in process.
Thank you,
Okay.
Susan.
And the reference to the district doing it, is that?
I mean, you could, if you want to retain that statement in the policy, you could put the district will do that. I don't think you need that statement in there because it's more procedural. I think you just want to have a statement that you're going to do pre-employment drug testing. And so it would be more generic, and then you skip over all of the actual procedures, including who's going to schedule it, when it's going to be scheduled, all of that.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Dr. Keyser?
Thank you for Ms. Love about the clarification of the statement, because part of me was thinking, you know, superintendent or designee or something to the point of that there's a person designated to do that, and that certainly may change in terms of, you know, it's human resources. It could be delegated to an individual person who's doing that. My question is to the point of when and where in the process do we do the drug testing, and my only wondering in terms of having the drug testing prior to offering the position, I just wonder if currently, I believe, at least for me, I was offered a conditional offer of employment pending, you know, completion of a drug screen, physical, and so on and so forth. So that's our current practice, and I'm not sure how that changes from a legal standpoint, Ms. Love, if we were to try to do it even before we offered the conditional offer of employment. Does it change?
Generally, any medical test can only be done post-offer, so after you've made an offer of employment. And so to minimize any potential challenge as to whether a drug test is or is not a medical test, it's recommended that you do them post-offer rather than pre-offer. But if that's the only thing you're doing is a drug test, legally you could do just the drug test pre-offer. The concern is that so you do the medical review officer, so they come back with a positive test. And now you have medical information that they're taking a prescribed drug. And so did you say you're doing them post-offer now or pre-offer?
Post. It's a conditional offer of employment pending, and then it lists.
Right, and so it's an offer. It's conditional, but it's still an offer of employment. So it's a conditional offer, and therefore you don't have any issues regarding whether it's a medical test or not that would limit your ability to do when you do the test, because you give them a conditional offer. It's conditioned on their passing whatever. If you do a physical exam, if you do a drug test, psychological exams, any of those type of exams that would be classified as medical exams can only be done after you've made the conditional offer of employment.
But you're saying that if we're doing just the drug test, that could be done pre-offer.
Right, as long as it doesn't reveal any medical information, which is where you have a risk, a potential risk.
And what risk would that be if a drug test either came back positive or revealed medical information?
Well, it becomes, it won't be a problem as long as it doesn't prevent you from hiring the individual. But so it comes back positive for a drug that's been legally prescribed. As long as that doesn't in any way impair the hiring, there won't be any liability, because the person's not going to bring a claim because you didn't deny them employment.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Dr. Kuser?
I believe so. I guess my question is, I guess the hypothetical is, a drug test comes back and it reveals something and we don't offer the person conditional offer. Does that expose the district in any way, shape, or form? I understand if it comes back negative, great. But if it comes back anything other than negative, what exposure does it?
Yeah, if it comes back positive and then you don't move forward and then you don't offer employment, the employee could file a claim that the reason you denied them employment was because of a medical condition, a disability that they have, and they could claim disability discrimination. And you can still defend that and show that that wasn't the reason that you excluded someone, but it does expose the district to potential liability.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Williams.
Thank you. So a couple of thoughts in regards to the conditional job offer. There's a cost associated also with drug testing for pre-employment physicals as well. So that's always something to consider. When you look at a candidate and you're extending that conditional offer, we're also investing in that candidate. So if we were to do a pre-employment physical for pre-offers for more than one candidate, that it doesn't provide the same experience for a candidate as if you were choosing one with that conditional offer. The other thought that I had too is for our department, as we look at our recruiting practices and processes, we need some autonomy or some flexibility around the language in terms of the process. We just recently hired somebody out of state and she was not able to relocate, but we wanted to get her employment to the board and for approval. So we were able to coordinate her pre-employment physical with another provider in that state. So when we look at hiring diverse candidates, and if we have that autonomy to look at processes outside of our own demographic area, the flexibility in the language will help us with that.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Board Member Levy.
Oh, I put in the adjustments for consideration of and employment offers only because I personally know of a person who was hired by the district, started work, and was then asked to come in to do the drug screening, so to avoid that. But I am comfortable with it being conditional with the additional information that Susan and Ms. Williams have entered with the additional cost, and also how that could open the district up for liability. If, let's say, someone's on depression medication and they aren't selected for a different reason, then that could leave us vulnerable for a suit.
Board Member Wong.
It's more of just a comment. Susan and Tanya, thank you, or Ms. Williams and Ms. Love, thank you for the information. Something I always enjoy is learning more stuff each day. And I think that the language, especially around the pre-testing, is valuable. I think I would agree. We don't want to open ourselves up to potential lawsuits because of some unforeseen circumstance that we potentially could avoid. Thank you both for all that information.
All right, I think I've gotten to everyone in the chat section. Are we ready to craft some language then here, people? I think, so Board Member Levy, you'd be okay saying condition of, did you just say? Okay, so could we say then a pre-employment drug test shall be required as a condition of employment, period? We all good so far? Okay. All pre-employment drug tests shall be completed Okay, now what are we going to do? Is it going to be prior to employment offers or prior to beginning job duties?
Beginning job duties.
Okay, prior to beginning job duties, period. Human resources, scheduled drug tests.
I think that's it, those two sentences.
And then is it the end? Is that it? Just that?
Do we not put in the failure to report or to appear?
No, I think at that point, I would suggest that you add the sentence that recognizes that the superintendent will ensure that appropriate lawful pre-employment drug testing procedures are put in place or are adopted or are used.
Could we say superintendent or designee so that human resources could do it? Okay.
That would be acceptable, yeah.
Okay, so superintendent or designee. Okay, now I just lost every good word you just said.
So at the end of your first two sentences, I would just recommend you add the superintendent or designee will develop appropriate and lawful pre-employment testing procedures.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, are you getting that? Ms. Schultz?
Yes. I just need to know if the board wanted to go with, because she has said it two different ways now, Ms. Love has. She has said will assure that there are appropriate and lawful pre-employment procedures, and she's also said that he will develop, or I should say he or she will develop appropriate and lawful pre-employment testing procedures. So I just need to know which way the board would like it.
Which was the first again, Ms. Schultz, you said?
One was to ensure that appropriate and lawful pre-employment testing or procedures are in place, and the other one was to develop appropriate and lawful.
I like in place. Board members?
Can we just say will follow? Is it okay to assume that if they're going to follow them, they're either developed, established, etc., but will follow appropriate and lawful procedures?
Board member Wong? Oh,
from a legal perspective, that would be fine.
Board member Wong, you look a little perplexed.
Well, we went from develop to will follow. I just want to make sure. So who's developing it then? Who's creating it?
I think the understanding is, as far as Ms. Williams said, like they already have a procedure. They want to have the autonomy to have a little flexibility if you have someone out of state, etc.
Right.
So we do have appropriate and legal procedures. We're just affirming that we're going to follow them, is my understanding.
All right. Ms. Shope, would you mind reading that the last sentence one more time?
Sure. The superintendent or designee will follow all appropriate and lawful pre-employment testing procedures.
I think it sounds beautiful. Any other questions or discussion, board members? And Susan, Ms. Love, thank you once again. You're a great wordsmith.
Well, in that one, I didn't type it out, so that's why I interchanged the word choice there.
Hey, that's just fine. Oh, Board Member Levy, was that a fairly new one? Oh, okay, we're good. Okay. Are we ready to perhaps make a motion?
I move that we amend policy 522.11 as previously stated, and pass that to the full board and eliminate policy 522.11 rule 1.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second to, Board Member Levy, help me out here, to
Amend policy 522.11 as stated.
thank you, to amend policy 522.11, pre-employment drug testing as stated, and to delete 522.11 Rule 1, pre-employment drug testing procedures. Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, thank you. The motion carries to go before the full board. All right, now we're on F, correct? Policy 522.2, employee misconduct, policy 522.2, Rule 1, guidelines for reporting employee misconduct. Get that pulled up. All right, Susan, you're up to bat again.
Okay, so I'm just looking here at this one. Again, moving to the more broad policy statement, this is a statutory requirement, the reporting of certain misconduct. The misconduct is specified by statute. So you've already got a policy regarding misconduct. This is a policy regarding reporting under the Wisconsin statutes. So the statement that's in red, any employee who has engaged in specified misconduct shall be reported to the state superintendent of public instruction. Superintendent shall make such reports in accordance with state law and established procedures. If a report concerns the superintendent, the board president shall file the report. I think that's really all you need as a policy statement. And then, because the specifics and everything else that follows is really statutory. And so whether you want to incorporate all of that, I don't think it's necessary. If your policy is that you're going to report in accordance with the law, then that's what happens. And you don't have to incorporate the statute into your policy.
Thank you for that explanation, Susan. Board members, let's see, nobody's up. And Board Member Levy, it looks like you had agreed with that. I like that. Board Member Wong?
I like it as well.
Okay. Well, phew, because we still have one more to get through here before we go to personnel recs. So, anybody ready for a motion?
I move that we edit policy 522.2 in accordance to the guidance of our legal counsel for the board, and that we omit or delete policy 522.2 Rule 1.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to restate 522.2 as suggested by our attorney, and to delete 522.2 Rule 1, guidelines for reporting employee misconduct to the board. Any questions or discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? All right, the motion carries to the full board for a first reading. And now we need to go back up to letter A. Policy 511, affirmative action and equal opportunity employment. All right. And on this one, we do have some questions and or suggestions. So shall I just start reading through it, everyone? Okay.
I think
Would it make more sense to start reading in the sections where there are
Yes.
questions or what needs to be changed?
Yeah, that is much better, Board Member Levy. Thank you. So it looks like we're good on the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph, the fourth paragraph is where we have some suggestions. So after the first sentence, no position shall be filled until underrepresented persons, including but not limited to African Americans, Hispanics, Pacific Islanders, etc., women and persons with disabilities have been sought out and qualified candidates encouraged to apply. And the comment is that it would be helpful to outline the parameters of this statement.
Okay. Maybe just a brief explanation regarding affirmative action. Affirmative action is a requirement primarily as a product of federal funding or federal contracts. And it requires that employers take steps in an attempt to achieve or to eliminate underutilization. And under the law, it defines underutilization. There are tests that can be run to see if there's underutilization in your organization. It's a product of the different groupings of employees and the number of applicants and the demographic makeup of those applicants. It applies to it applies to minorities as defined under the law. It applies to women, and it applies to disabled and to veterans. And what it requires that you do is, if you find underutilization, it requires that you have adopted in the form of an affirmative action plan steps that you intend to take to address that underutilization, to attempt to increase essentially your applicant pool. And that normally involves outreach to groups where you would be able to reach those designated groups of people, minorities, women, veterans, and disabled. And it doesn't require that any quotas be set, but it does require that through an affirmative action plan, you've specified that you're going to do this outreach to try to improve your representation, to eliminate underutilization. So the question that says, would it be helpful to outline the parameters, you could certainly add a statement that you will engage in outreach or other methods of expanding, but I don't think in your policy that you want to specifically lay out how you will do that, because there are so many different methods of outreach, including like attending especially with with these days with electronic media. There are a lot of ways that you can reach out to groups where you can target where there's underutilization. So I would say, in answer to that question, you could lay out a general statement. I don't think you want to limit yourself within your broader policy statement.
Thank you for that explanation. Board Member Levy.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for laying that out. Both of those comments that are in blue are mine. And now after reflecting, that really seems like a how and not a what. But I would like to have some like brief statement captured that, like to Susan's point, if underutilization is, or to prevent underutilization, the administration will report out on its efforts on a quarterly basis to oversight and finance, or to the full board, to get the spirit of what I was getting at, but not get in the lane of the how. So that I think is still a what. Like, we want to make sure that this is happening, and to ensure this is happening, the administration will report out on this on some sort of regular cadence, but the how will be up to the administration.
And I'm talking muted, sorry. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Keither or Ms. Williams, but it's an annual report we get right now, correct? On what Board Member Levy was asking about?
Yeah, the diversity report that was reported out last January, and I think we're on the books to report out again in January 2021.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Levy, would you like that more often put in there, or how would you like that stated?
I would like that quarterly, and even if it was less formal than that annual report, because from my perspective, the annual report is just a snapshot of what has happened. That's not really actionable. If we see that this is an issue and we're getting a quarterly report, then it gives the administration the opportunity to get feedback from the board and adjust what it's doing. But if I'm just hearing from you every January, it's okay, thank you for telling me what happened. It doesn't leave that space to be actionable and impact how we move forward.
So are you saying then you would like just a statement put in that the board will receive quarterly updates regarding, I'm not saying it the way it probably should be said, regarding our affirmative action hires, or?
I would state the diversity of our hire, not our affirmative action hires, but yes, okay. I would like that on a quarterly basis.
Board Member Wong, I'm fine with that.
No, I'm fine. In fact, I think it's a very good idea, because I would agree the annual reports we get, and having been on the board, I mean, thinking of all the reports we get on an annual basis and presentations and what's really sticking in our mind, and knowing that we have had issues of underrepresentation throughout the district through all of our efforts, I think it's important to keep it front and center. So having it quarterly, I think, is going to put much more of a focus on that, and hopefully help not just this board, but future boards continue to push forward to make our district more diverse.
Thank you. And can I just back up really quickly? Can we just add veterans in there? Because that's not in there in that language for the underrepresented persons. And shame on me, I was not aware that veterans were part of that group, the underrepresented.
On the federal level, any employer receiving federal funds or a federal contractor, it's relatively new. So, I mean, that means within the last couple of years. But so I would suggest that you add,
okay,
after persons with disabilities, you add veterans.
Thank you. Board Member Levy. Oh, I thought you were reaching for your...
I know I was. Thank you for, so I didn't have to go through typing the question mark. So do we also, like, any protected class, could we put, because what about LGBTQ plus community? Could we put any member of a protected class? Does that capture everyone, people of the global majority, women, people who are differently abled, veterans, etc.?
Well, you could certainly do that as a policy matter, but as an affirmative action goal as an affirmative action recognition, at this point in time, because that flows down right now from federal law, those groups have not been added. They've specifically identified minorities, women, persons with disabilities, and veterans.
Could we say, we'll put the veterans in, and then could we say, okay, where was that? Until underrepresented persons have been sought to apply as well as protected classes? Would that work?
What if you put protected classes as approved by the federal government or a federal policy?
Well, but if I'm understanding what Susan just said, they're not.
But that would alleviate any problems in the future. If you have to make changes, it's already going to be added in.
But it's not under federal law, though, because underrepresented. Am I missing something?
The language is saying underrepresented, including but not limited to. So I wonder if the fact that it says not limited to allows for inclusion at our level as opposed to the federal level.
Oh, I like that. Board members? And as long as when we're hiring, all people who are in charge of hiring are aware of that. Which, Ms. Williams, I'm assuming new administrators who do hiring are given some type of training?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
There's an interviewing do's and don'ts, questions, that people can ask in an interview.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
But do we specifically have something? It's been a while, but I don't remember that language of the underrepresented populations. Is that part of it? If it's not, could you look into that, Ms. Williams?
Sure.
Or am I being a bossy Bessie here and micromanaging?
Not at all. I'd be happy to look into that.
Okay, because I think that's, extremely important. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so board members, we agreed we're going to have the veterans added, correct? Okay, and then now where are we at? Board member Levy.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, since it says no position shall be filled until, could you just speak to what our current practice is so we know if any adjustments need to be made? Because I know positions have been filled. So what are we currently doing to meet the spirit of this policy? Does that just mean putting it on we can? Is there anything additional that is happening?
Sure. So, first of all, we don't, I want to clarify that we don't collect demographic data prior to the whole application process. So someone's demographic data is not taken into consideration if somebody is extended an interview. So really, as an HR department, our efforts are made on building a candidate pool that is diverse. So we do use WeCan. WeCan does have some limitations in terms of outreach. Recently, we just partnered with diversityjobs.com, where they go in and they scrape all of our jobs from WeCan, and they have about 10 different software platforms that they use across the United States that hopefully will boost our positions and our vacancies and generate some interest with our underrepresented staff or candidates that are out there. So we're in the infant stages of looking at how we can really build some robust candidate pools.
So Susan, does that meet what we are listing as our current policy, what Ms. Williams just described, within no position shall be filled until?
Yes. I mean, really what it's saying is you're going to seek out these qualified candidates and advertising on a general, online site will not necessarily meet that, but reaching out and finding some of these other more diverse sites or that look to recruit diverse candidates certainly would. And so you want to be able, I mean, I think that what the policy is saying is, and I want to say also, this generally applies if you're filling positions internally, this would not generally apply for promotion purposes. So I wanted to throw that in. But you're going to look for what agencies might be able to reach out to these groups of candidates. And depending on where your underrepresentation occurs, the place may be different. And so you'll need to see how the newest partnership works. If that's providing a more diverse pool, you may need to look for other organizations that have that. And some of this outreach is you send a letter that says, we understand that you have active membership of veterans, or you're a veterans organization, or you're a women's organization or a minority organization. We ask that you encourage your contacts to look at our job postings. And that's one way, is you send letters out. You interact, you find these groups that might have these kinds of candidates, and then you go to their meetings to see if you can do outreach that way. So there are a lot of different ways to establish that, and they may not work. Some of them may work more effectively than others. But it sounds like you're making that first step to go that direction.
Thank you. Board Member Wong.
I want to go back to your comment about if it's an internal hire or promotion, then the rules don't apply, or what? Then I have another question to that as well.
Okay, well, the outreach effort rule doesn't really apply. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make a decision that you're not going to fill internally because you're going to look for a more diverse applicant pool. You can make that decision. But the affirmative action rules don't require you to make outreach efforts when you are hiring from an internal pool.
Okay. And this is a question probably for Ms. Williams or Mr. Keyser. As a district, what have we been doing, or is this something that we can look into as far as outreach to various organizations throughout our community to kind of let them know of positions, or and develop those channels of outreach, whether it be all the various groups that could be represented? I'm thinking one that comes to mind is like VFW or something like that for veterans, just to make people aware of, or some women's group, or the NAACP, or the Latino services groups, or whatever it might be. Are we doing anything at this time to reach out to those groups?
Local level, not at this time. However, I am happy to create some partnerships within the community to help drive that interest and build candidate pools.
I love that idea, Board Member Wong, and thank you, Ms. Williams, for looking into that and getting something going on that. I think that's really important. Board Member Levy?
It's partially been addressed. Thank you, Susan, for clarifying what the the affirmative action parameters are, but I would love, and I don't know if Susan, I defer to you, if we need to outline this in our policy, but I would love for our administration to commit that even when positions are being filled internally, that we would definitely do that outreach to still make sure that we have a diverse pool. And then I'd also like to ask Susan if you have any language around the cadence to which our administration will report back to us, with that being on a quarterly basis, so that these great ideas that were discussed, Ms. Williams, I'm excited to hear that it sounds like you're on board with those, so that the board can be up to date on what our administration is doing to help fulfill the spirit of our affirmative action policy.
Absolutely, yes.
Dr. Kieser?
Board Member Levy was reading my mind in terms of language in asking Ms. Love. I had jotted down as the conversation was occurring something to the effect of the superintendent or designee shall report to the board its efforts to address underutilization quarterly.
I like that. I see Board Member Levy nodding. Are you nodding, Board Member Wong? Okay. With that, so could we have, Ms. Shope, could you put that sentence in, please? Would you like Dr. Kieser to repeat it?
Yes, just once.
Yeah, I put that at the end of that paragraph. So at the end of the last sentence, you would insert this sentence: the superintendent or designee shall report to the board its efforts to address underutilization quarterly.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm excited. I love, Ms. Williams, that you're going to look into these other areas, and Board Member Levy, I think that was a great comment about doing the quarterly rather than the annual, to see where we're at. So someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can go on now to the Board of Education, and all personnel shall share the responsibility for making equal opportunity an actual functioning condition of the life of the school district of Beloit. Board Member Levy?
Yeah, I would just say, or its designee, I would change that to their, so we're not referring to the superintendent as an it. And then are we comfortable with that next paragraph after, leaving it as is? We will have a staff, because there are some additional comments there that may need to be addressed.
I'm just looking at Board Member Levy, and in the meantime, while I'm peeking, Board Member Wong, did you just stick that in when I was reading?
No, it was actually a little bit before that. I just had a question, and it came up regarding, I think, the internal process and some of the processes that I know that have been in place in the past. And just so that I think that whatever we're doing, whenever we're hiring, it's always fair and equitable. I know that there has been some situations in the past where people have been appointed to positions without proper hiring practices. And is this language in this policy going to be addressing that, or is this something that we need to be doing separately?
Either Dr. Kieser or Ms. Williams?
Board Member Wong.
So
So Board Member Wong, are you asking in terms of, is it legal to appoint a person to a position as opposed to interview a person for a position? Yes, especially when there's processes that have been put into place, and then suddenly people are a person is appointed to a position. I think that it's been a bad practice that we've had in our district over the years. And I think that it's something, quite honestly, if we have to have it in policy to prevent it from happening in the future, I would like to see that addressed. I'll look to Ms. Love to help guide in terms of where language like that would be most appropriately placed, whether it be in this particular policy or in another particular policy that might be in there. My experience with the hiring piece has been that it's boards have appointed people, and that's been an allowance that the board has designated one way or the other. So, Ms. Love, sorry.
Yeah, no, I would just say from a policy perspective, I think that's more of a hiring policy. Rather than this policy is I should go up and double check, but this policy is the EEO and affirmative action policy. So what I'm hearing you talk about is a broader, how should we be appointing people without going through a hiring process? I don't think that would belong in this particular policy. This policy is intended to say we're an equal opportunity employer and an affirmative action employer, and therefore we're not going to discriminate in hiring, and we're going to go beyond that, and we're going to attempt to engage in outreach to ensure that our applicant pools help us address any underutilization. That's the purpose of this policy. I think the other issue of what is the proper process for hiring, whether there should be a hiring process for every position, whether positions are filled through hiring, transfer, demotion, promotion, that's a whole separate policy question.
Thank you, Susan, for pointing that out. That's an excellent point. Ms. Williams, did you have a chance to speak?
So I wanted to go back to the language that we were including in the paragraph, and I think the reference was underutilization, and I just want to make sure that that's the term we're using, or is it under representation?
Affirmative action always refers to underutilization.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
To everyone, I'd like to point out the time. It is 6:20, and I'm just peeking at what we're going through, and there's still quite a bit, and I'm just making a suggestion that I don't want to go through this quickly because this should not be done quickly, but on the same hand, I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get through the personnel rec portion. Is it legal? Legal is probably not the proper word, but is it okay for me to make the suggestion that to give this, I think, the time it deserves and needs to, I don't want to use the word table because that can mean indefinitely, but can we add this to our next meeting date, this policy, to continue going through this and then go to the personnel recs? Because I think everybody would appreciate a quick dinner break and a little break before the 7 o'clock meeting, because that's going to be a long one. So what do you think, board members? And does that sound like a plan? We're not going to table this, but I'm just suggesting that we go ahead and add this policy to our next meeting. Would that be all right? Everyone? I saw Board Member Levy shaking her head. Board Member Wong?
I would agree. I think that this policy, we need to give it its due choice here and do work. Yeah. I mean, it's way too important of a policy to be trying to rush through. So I would definitely agree to postpone it to our next meeting. I believe we probably need a motion for that. So I move to postpone the work on, the work on policy 511, affirmative action and equal opportunity employment, to our next meeting, which, do we have a date on that, or should I put a date?
I was thinking December 8th, but that's going to be our training. So let me see, check my calendar quickly. So then the next one would be,
We're going to be going into Christmas then.
oh, are we meeting December 22nd?
Our December 22nd meeting was moved to the 15th for our regular board meeting.
Oh.
I'm assuming policy is going to be shifted, but I don't know if we made that official decision.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Board Member Levy. I don't know, so could we just say tentatively the December 15th meeting?
15th, yeah, that's what I would say, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Do I hear a second?
Second?
All right, so we are going to postpone this very important discussion, Policy 511, Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity Employment, for further discussion tentatively on December 15th. Any questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, all opposed? I said aye, correct? So the motion passes, and and thank you, everyone. And we are now at personnel items.
Ms. Board Member Jacobs, can I make one quick
Yes.
announcement?
Yes, please.
Okay. Before we move into personnel recs, so I had shared out the next set of policies. So it starts with policy 522.31 and ends with policy 523.2. I will reshare out that email after our business board meeting tonight. But if you have not submitted any questions or updates, please have those no later than December 2nd, so that way we can forward those to legal and have them be able to be prepared to respond to those at our next policy meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Keyser.
Thank you.
I need to put that on my calendar. Okay, so again, we are at personnel items. We're on the November 24th, 2020 employment recs, Exhibit A.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I see that Vanessa Brown is listed on employee recs, and I just wanted to confirm, did you mean Vanessa Brown, or is there an individual Vanessa Brown?
If I let you know, I did try to upload a corrected one, and it is Vanessa.
Okay, good to know. Actually, before we go any further, Susan, you've done such an outstanding job, and you've been with us for 2.5 hours. Dr. Keyser, I'm looking to you for guidance. May she be dismissed?
She left.
Nope.
Pardon? She was?
She's here.
Did you and I missed it? I'm just saying. I just say I'm going home, but I already am. Susan, thank you for everything.
Okay, so you're done with me?
See, she didn't either.
Did I hear a motion, or is there a motion before we excuse?
Oh, okay. Oh, so you do want to go through personnel recs. That was my
Correct.
question. Okay. No, I have no motion on personnel recs yet. So I guess you're not dismissed yet, Susan.
Oh, okay, and I apologize. My phone, I've never had this happen. My phone said it was overheated and needed to cool down.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
so
weird. It happened outside, in the sun, but okay. All right. So, is anybody I'm waiting for someone to say something. Board Member Levy and Board Member Wong.
I'll move approval of the personnel employment recommendations, Exhibit A.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'm not seconding because I'm voting against it.
Oh, okay. So in this case, I can make a second, correct? All right, I second it. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay, all those,
The correction, and I might not be looking, I reviewed it yesterday and it still said Vanessa, but just make sure that that correction is there, is that it's Vanessa Brown.
thank you, Board Member Levy. So Ms. Williams, you will make sure that it says Vanessa.
That's what
We
I'm
have
saying.
We have that corrected on our end already.
Oh, okay, awesome. Okay. So there's been a motion and a second to approve the November 24th, 2020 employment recommendations, Exhibit A. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
All right, the motion passes. And we are not in closed session, so we cannot do the closed session meeting. So now we are at adjournment. And before we get to adjournment, I just want to thank you again, Susan, for all of the great help tonight and clarification. That I learned a lot too, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night. All right, so we are at adjournment. But before we get there, we are going to tentatively be meeting on December 15th. And do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right, I have a motion and a second for adjournment. I can never say that word correctly. Any questions or discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
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 Aye, all opposed? All right, we are adjourned. See you back in a half hour. Thank you, everyone.